Alright, in this topic we're going to be focusing on how organisms are classified, um, the naming process, and then how we can use things called dichotomous keys to figure out names and classification. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, what classification is just how we group um, information based on similarities. Okay, we can do this to abiotic factors. We can do this to biotic factors. So any type of information that can be grouped based on similarity is what classification is. It is important because it helps with organization. It helps understand the link between organisms. It helps to understand the evolution or how the environment can affect the evolution of organisms. So that is one of a few of the reasons why we look at classification. Now, taxonomy is focusing on that branch of science where names and grouping of organisms and coming up with the names of those organisms is studied, and it's studied and set up due to those different characteristics. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at in this unit is how taxonomy flows, how this classification process flows. A little bit of background information. Carl Linnaeus, he was the scientist back in the 1700s that developed this method of grouping organisms or developed the first classification system. He studied plants, and if you think about how difficult it is to look at a plant and determine what type of plant it is, when he was having these same types of difficulties, when studying the different characteristics, he came up with an idea of how to group them based on their characteristics to make it easier to classify them. And then this grouping or this classification process was then, once it was developed by Linnaeus, it was later used or expanded to include animals as well. Okay, so it first started because of the difficulties with classifying plants, and then later it was expanded to include animals. Um, Here's an example of just one of the many ways that classification has helped in grouping organisms. For example, bats have the ability to fly. They were once thought of to be more in a group with birds because birds have the ability to fly. However, looking at structural similarities and evolutionary relationships, that's what classification does. It was found that bats have hair, which birds do not. It was found that they produce milk, which birds do not. So even though that they are very similar to birds in the fact that they have wings and they have that ability to fly, they had more characteristics in common with mammals, and so they were therefore grouped with mammals as a result of that. So this is just one example of many of how classification has helped in the grouping of organisms. So Linnaeus, he came up with this naming system. It's a binomial nomenclature. Binomial just means to name, or this binomial nomenclature just stands for two names for the naming system. So there's two words that make up the name of an organism, and Linnaeus is the one that came up with this process. The binomial nomenclature, or the name of an organism, scientific name, is going to be written in Latin. There are two parts, okay, to the name, the genus and the species. The genus is the first word of the name, and the species is the second word of the name. How it's written, well, the genus word is going to be capitalized. The species word is going to be in lowercase, and it is going to be written in italics if it's printed or if it's typed. And if it's handwritten, it's going to be underlined because you cannot handwrite in italics. So if it's going to be printed, it's going to be italicized, and if it's going to be handwritten, it would be underlined. So this is the guidelines in writing the scientific name of an organism. Here's an example. The Texas map turtle, very common turtle, okay, in this area. We haven't started talking about reptiles yet, but turtles are aquatic animals. So the Texas map turtle is aquatic. Its actual scientific name is Graptemus versa. Okay, notice that Graptemus versa is italicized because it's printed. Also notice that the first word, Graptemus, is capitalized. The second word, versa, is not. Okay, so Graptemus would be the genus and versa would be the species. And then if it would be handwritten, here's how handwriting would work. You would just underline it and still capitalize the genus, the lowercase, for the species. Here's some other examples. E. coli, okay, bacteria. Notice the genus part of the name is capitalized, the species part of the name is not. The Tyrannosaurus rex, okay, same example. Homo sapiens. So here are just some examples that you can look at of different organisms and how the genus is capitalized, the species part of the name is not. Alright, so I've mentioned the word genus and species a couple different times. Well, this is the level of taxonomy. Okay, organisms are grouped by these different levels or by the taxa that they're found in. The broadest category always starts off the taxonomy of an organism, and it goes all the way down to the most specific category, which is the species. Okay, and I like this. You can come up with any type of example you want, but here is the order of classification. Every organism always starts out with domain, okay, and every organism always ends with species as far as its taxonomy. So domain is the broadest category, and notice in this example it's the part of the box that encompasses everything. And then the farther in, or the further in you go into the box, less of the box is included. So kingdom would be the second category, or taxa. Phylum would be the third, then class, then order, then family. Then you get to the two groups that make up the name of an organism, the genus and then the species. Okay, so domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. That is the order of taxonomy when classifying organisms. When you're looking at taxonomy, there are three major domains, okay, and 6 kingdoms. The 3 major domains would be if it's eukaryotes. Then if it's not eukaryotes, if it's prokaryotes, then the prokaryotes can be broken down into bacteria, which is the common type of bacteria, or archaea, which is going to be more of an ancient living or ancient or very old type of bacteria. So your domains would be eukarya, prokarya, and the prokarya would be just the bacteria like the E. coli in your stomach, or archaea or archaebacteria, which would be very old, like extremophiles is what they're called. They live in very extreme living conditions, whether it be very hot temperatures like in lava, or very cold temperatures like in glaciers, very high pressures at the bottom of the ocean, that type of thing. And then your 6 kingdoms, and this is what we're going to be getting into over the next 6 weeks, are these major kingdoms. You've got your bacteria. Okay, here's your Euarchaea bacterium, but then we're going to be looking at your Protista. Then we'll talk about fungus. Then we'll eventually get to plants, and then we'll end with animals. So those are the 6 major kingdoms. Once again, bacteria broken down into 2. Your normal, everyday living bacteria, okay, which is your eubacteria, and then your old or ancient living, your extreme living bacteria, which is your archaebacteria. Here's another way of looking at taxonomic classification. Remember, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Okay. Here's one example of how you can look at it. There's other ways that you can look at how to understand this classification order. For humans, here is our classification, our taxonomy. Our domain is eukarya because we're eukaryotes. We're in the animal kingdom, or Animalia. We're part of the Chordata phylum, which means we have a spinal cord. We're in the class mammals, Mammalia. Our order is primates. Our family is Hominidae. Genus is Homo, and species is Sapiens. All right, that is our classification, and every organism has the same type of classification, domain down through species. Now you have to memorize this order of classification, so you can come up with your own if you don't like the one that I give you an example for. But here's one that I've used in the past. Did King Philip come over for great soup? Okay, I've used one in the past. Did King Philip come over for grape soda? Okay, however you want to memorize it, but make sure that you're good with the order of these groupings or classifications. Now, we've talked about phylogeny and cladistics before, but we can look at evolutionary history of a species and compare classification based on that. Now, phylogeny, remember we've talked about, is the evolutionary developments and taxonomic grouping. This assumes that a group of organisms diverged or evolved from a common ancestor. And then a cladogram, which we've looked at before, is just a map, if you will, of the phylogeny of a species. So last time when we got into evolution, we looked at cladograms quite a bit. And we know that looking at this cladogram, everything above this red line that says vertebrae, everything above that means that all those organisms have vertebrae. Then everything above this line on the cladogram says that every organism has a bony skeleton. So everything above this line, they all have bony skeletons. You keep going up. Everything above this one has 4 limbs. Everything above this one produces amniotic eggs, and so forth. We've looked at that before, but we can use these and tie them in with taxonomic organization. Now, dichotomous keys, this is also something we can use to help with the identification of organisms through taxonomy. You might have seen something similar to these before, but they're kind of like a map. Okay, they're a set of numbered statements that give characteristics, a single characteristic, each statement will, of a particular organism. And we can use them kind of like a map to help us determine an organism based upon its characteristics. So the physical characteristics that we see. Okay, we can use a dichotomous key to help us determine what type of frog this is, or what type of caterpillar, so forth. Here's an example of a dichotomous key. Okay, notice that each section has a statement, and it's just a characteristic. So how to use a dichotomous key, it's very straightforward. You always start with number 1, okay, and you work down, you follow the keys until you reach the organism or the object you're trying to identify. And then when you find that object, you know it'll give you the name of that object, usually a scientific name. And then when you try to identify the next object, you start back over at number 1. So this one is just an example of candy, a dichotomous key for candy. So if you had a piece of candy in front of you, you would first identify is the candy chewy or if it's hard candy. If it's chewy candy, you go to number 2, and then you decide is the candy wrapped or is it not wrapped. If the candy was wrapped, you would go to number 3. If the candy's not wrapped, then here is your type of candy. And then you would start over again with the next piece of candy. And you do that for all of them until you identify the name of that object based on its physical characteristics. So cladograms are also very good, or excuse me, dichotomous keys, like I mentioned, are good for helping identify organisms, but they do tie in with this idea of classification and naming. So the big takeaway from this stuff, Carl Linnaeus, okay, what he did, first want to come up with this naming, this binomial nomenclature to where every organism has 2 words for its name, its scientific name, and how we can use taxonomy to help identify that.